with it goes to the RTM. I guess my question is, when would the town receive these funds? This is a fiscal year CDBG program, correct?
Program year, correct, 16. Currently, sorry for my voice, I do sound manly tonight, but the current CDBG program year runs on a calendar year. So we begin January 1st and December 31st. There is no clear, consistent reply as to when the CDBG funds will be available. Just as an example, last year, 2014, the funds were not made available until June 30th is when we received the HUD agreement. This year, we didn't receive the HUD agreement until this month. So I can't tell you
So that's
exactly
a 6 to 10 month lag.
Correct. And it's all, sorry, go ahead.
So that's when you, sorry to interrupt.
That's-
That's when you receive the HUD agreement. When do the actual funds get released?
That's the release. The HUD agreement cannot be sent to us until Congress releases the funds.
Got it. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. So just to answer the other question, the other part of the question, the program, the CDBG program procedure begins with the advisory committee, which is a group that was established to recommend projects that should be funded with CDBG funds to the first selectman. It is presented during the Board of Selectmen meeting, but it really is just presented to the first selectman. The first selectman holds a public hearing, and then he finalizes his decision. This year, he made some changes to the CDAC recommendations. After the first selectman issues his final funding allocations, that gets sent to the BET. After your review and approval, it gets sent to the RTM. Now, in the past, it used to be that the BET reviews this item during September, and the RTM reviews the item in October. And the reason for that was that the town had to submit the application 45 days before the program year starts, which is November 15th. But as I mentioned at the Budget Committee public meeting, we had received guidance from the HUD Hartford office last year that we cannot submit the application until they tell us that we can, meaning that they have to wait for the notification of the entitlement amount from the Washington office before they can start reviewing applications or the annual plan.
Thank you. That helps. Further, Ms. Tarkington?
Well, I think
Oh,
Mr. Chairman was...
okay, I'm sorry. You're,
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to review some of the points I raised when the Budget Committee voted on this item at their meeting. And first, I emphasized the critical importance of Parsonage Cottage to our community. This is a community gem that was traditionally the almshouse here in Greenwich, where the low-income elderly could go to live. And that tradition continues today thanks to a complicated syndicate of financing put together in 1995 involving loans and low-income housing tax credits that all funded the renovation, the beautiful renovation of Parsonage Cottage. So I want to be very clear tonight, as I was at the Budget Committee, that we all care very deeply about the residents at Parsonage. We care very deeply about the facility. I think we're all on the same page in terms of supporting and maintaining a very high-quality facility for the elderly in this community. And that's the primary goal here, and I'm so glad we have representatives now coming in as I'm talking about the importance of Parsonage Cottage. But the BET has an additional duty here as fiscal stewards for the town. We have a duty to taxpayers to make sure that their hard-earned tax dollars are spent wisely, and we have a duty to make sure that the financial affairs of the town are conducted in a thoughtful and reasonable and prudent way. So we have two goals here: maintaining this beautiful facility, taking care of its residents, as well as our duty to conduct the financial affairs of the town in a prudent way. So the Housing Authority brought an application to the town over 2 years ago for the complete forgiveness of the CDBG loan made in connection with the financing of Parsonage Cottage. And that application was far more complicated than anyone initially understood. And we are all trying to do our best to resolve the many issues that are associated with this application that the Housing Authority brought to us and to the town. So with all that context, let's just talk about the vote before us tonight. Let's be very clear that the vote tonight and at the Budget Committee is a vote to make funding available to replace the boiler at Parsonage Cottage. I believe the Budget Committee are not suggesting that funding for the boiler be cut now or in the future. Not at all. We are approving money for the boiler, and let's be clear about the timing of the funding, because we just heard from Princess. The community development money being approved tonight won't be available tomorrow or next week or this winter. It won't be available for many, many months, perhaps even a year from now. That is the nature of the CDBG funding process, and we sincerely hope the financial issues about Parsonage Cottage will be long resolved by the time this money is available from HUD. The condition on the funds being proposed is a very simple one that the BET has used with other departments many times, and far more simple than the conditions that we have placed on the fire department, on Nathaniel Witherell operations this year, on MESA, on New Lebanon, and on the Byram Pool project. The condition simply asks the applicant to return to the BET for release of the funds long before those funds are going to be available anyway from HUD. The condition is appropriate, we believe, because as the BET working group has pointed out publicly, the financing of capital items at Parsonage is central to the issues we are trying to resolve. It was the intention of all the agreements in 1995 that items like the boiler be funded out of cash flow produced by the operations at Parsonage and put into a capital reserve, and not funded by CDBG grants. But this has not been done. But 2 years ago, the BET offered a way to do this refinancing by refinancing 2 loans with terms better than you can get anywhere, and improving the cash flow from the operations at Parsonage to the point where they could fund the boiler. In fact, if that deal had been accepted when offered 2 years ago, there would be enough money to pay for the boiler today and for this winter, instead of waiting until the CDBG money comes from HUD, perhaps a year from now. It would not be responsible, in our view, to approve these funds without a condition that acknowledges to the public and acknowledges to the RTM that the appropriate way to finance the boiler is through cash flow. This condition simply raises all of these issues and encourages all the parties to come to a resolution. There's been a lot of hard work put into this because we all care very much. So I want to acknowledge and thank all the hard work of the law department, who's been extremely helpful all the way along in advising the BET on Parsonage, as they did with this condition and as they have throughout all of our meetings and deliberations. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the controller, Princess Urfe, the CDBD administrator, the 3 other members of the working group, Mr. Johnson, Ms. Tarkington, Mr. Finger, and also Mr. Mason, who have all worked very, very hard to resolve these issues. And let me just finish by saying something that the town attorney, Wayne Fox, and assistant attorney, Amina Ahmad, have said to us in our public meetings, and they can speak to it again tonight if they want to. They have said to us that the ultimate resolution of all of the issues raised by the BET's Parsonage Cottage Working Group will have to be approved by 3 bodies, no matter what we all decide to do here: the Board of Selectmen, the BET, and the RTM. So I respectfully urge my fellow members to approve the CDBG application tonight, as we've heard, with the condition. And I sincerely hope that all arms of town government will come together as soon as possible so we can resolve all of these issues quickly for the benefit of Parsonage Cottage and its residents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tarkington, I have you next. Mr. Finger, I have you after that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and our guests here and others, I strongly support the working group and am a member of that group, and I support its efforts to resolve the Parsonage Cottage loan restructuring with the Housing Authority. We first met 26 months ago. This needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved immediately. I concur that the board can vote on conditions, and adding a condition here. Nevertheless, I would like to separate both the restructuring from this community development block grant to Parsonage Cottage. I believe there's a need for the boiler and the impact on the Parsonage Cottage, and again, would like to separate this need from the BET's discussions with the Housing Authority obligations. And therefore, Mr. Chairman, at an appropriate time, I would like to make a motion to remove this condition.
Okay, I'll call on you to make your motion now.
Yeah? I move that we remove the condition that Mr. Johnson previously had read, which is conditioned $103,834.37 allocated for the Parsonage Cottage boiler is subject to release upon the resolution of the issues raised by the BET Parsonage Cottage Working Group no later than April 18th, 2016.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second that motion.
Seconded by Mr. Blankley. Discussion on the motion to divide the condition from the
Mr.
appropriation.
Chairman, point of order, if I may.
Goldrick?
Perhaps now is the time that we move back to that public hearing, because it was the first order of business.
Okay,
I know they
Mr.
want to
Goldrick.
hear from us, but we should have...
Mr. Goldrick, I'll say it to you one more time the same way. The public hearing is going to continue purposely after our deliberations on this item, specifically for that purpose.
Point of order. Mr. Mason,
Mr. Von
you're
Keijseling,
making decisions on the basic item and may or may not be changing them. This is an important vote that the lady
That's
has
correct.
asked for.
That's-
If the condition is not removed, this would be the time, which would be gracefully the opportunity, if the BET so chooses, to reduce the amount of tension involved in this situation. I think it would be appropriate for the...
thank you for your opinion. If you would sign up to be a speaker, I will recognize
I
you.
need to sign up. You know, I said...
I have a motion on the floor that's seconded. That item takes precedent.
After that.
Are you finished now? Thank you.
No, I'm-
I suggest that you are finished. I have a motion on the floor that's seconded. The public hearing is open. As soon as we're done with our discussion, I'm going to welcome the discussion, especially considering a majority of the people in the room came in after we started the item. Thank you for your comments. Ms. Tarkington, discussion on your motion to amend the item.
Mr. Chairman, are you asking me? I made my comments prior to making that motion. I asked you whether this was the time to make the motion. So
Okay.
I put it forth.
Further discussion on the motion to amend. I'm sorry, I had Mr. Blankley, then Mr. Rimmer.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would, this falls on in some way, those who've just joined this meeting would not realize that I had spoken earlier this evening on the subject of what I call micromanaging and BET overreach. There was another item before us where I argued that it was not within the purview of this board to make executive decisions on the basis of the power of the purse. And it's very much in this context that I see this particular condition, and for this reason I second Ms. Tarkington's motion. I think that the two items should be separated because I believe that the matter that has been outstanding now for 2 years, unfortunately, should have been resolved a long time ago, and I'm disappointed that the offer that we put forward has not been accepted. Nonetheless, that is a separate matter in my mind from a CDBG grant. And I would very much like to keep the two things separate. Using one as leverage over the other is not an appropriate way to act, in my view.
Thank you. Mr. Finger, or I'm sorry, Mr. Rimmer?
Yes, respectfully, I wonder if I might be able to induce the chair to reconsider a ruling that you entered a moment ago. While I don't intend to support my colleague's motion to strike the condition, I do think that perhaps it's appropriate that the public have an opportunity of comment before we vote on that item, because were Mrs. Tarkington's motion to be approved, then the issue would already be, in a sense, decided in one way. If her motion is disapproved, then the issue is sort of decided in the other way. It does seem to me that the critical moment that the public might wish to be speaking to is the question of the condition. And so if we're going to be voting on whether to exclude the condition or keep the condition, perhaps this might be the moment for public comment.
As I said at the beginning of the meeting, I will hold the votes until the public hearing is over on this. However, this is a procedural matter, and this motion would have to be disposed of beforehand. I just finally received my first speaker, okay, for the evening. Prior to that, I had none. Thank you for your help with this matter.
Just a suggestion.
So the motion before the BET right now is a motion to divide the item. But I do have a speaker that has popped in, Anthony Johnson, Housing Authority, Town of Greenwich. And thank you for being the first, and welcome. You're the first 3-minute speaker we have.
Mr. Chairman, if you'll suffer me for one more moment, in your opening remarks...
The key word is suffer.
In your opening remarks, you said something to the effect of wishing to limit debate to 3 minutes. Is that your plan?
I said it then. I would have the same meeting now, I think, if 3 minutes when I said it then.
Normally, a limitation of debate requires a vote of the body to be carried by a 2/3 vote. I wonder if the chair would like to entertain that vote at this
If you would like to make the motion, I will.
I would move that debate be limited to 3 minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 11-1.
No,
2. Okay, 11-2. 10-2, I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you, Anthony, I'm sorry for that. Welcome, good to see you.
Thank you for having us this evening. My name is Anthony Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the Greenwich Housing Authority. And you are correct. This request from the Housing Authority to have a grant that we asked to be turned into a loan that we knew we were going to request once the financial transaction for Parsonage Cottage had been completed, to be turned back again or forgiven into a grant, was always contemplated by the Housing Authority in Parsonage Cottage. This has gone on for quite a while, and I think there's some undersurface information that has circulated that people who are involved in this believe that something else is going on at the Housing Authority. So let me just confront this. We've had an auditor come out. We allowed your auditor into our building. Unprecedented, by the way, for the Housing Authority since I've been there. And to my knowledge, none of my peers have had an auditor from the town of Greenwich come to Parsonage Cottage or any of our other facilities to audit it. But regardless of that, we get plenty of audits, and we had no issue with an audit from your auditor, and we still don't. But I believe that we have attempted to answer all of your questions. We want to answer all of your questions. I can tell you, now that we're speaking to the entire board, that I've asked for an end game. When is this going to end? When are we going to complete this? What are your last questions? I have an email back that says, I don't have to tell you anything. Well, that doesn't end this. That tells me that you want to ask me more questions until when? Until when does that end? Does it stop at the financial statements, or now is it into the tax returns? We're talking about tax returns now, that I'm not a tax auditor, but I can answer the questions in the tax audit and our tax returns. But tax returns have nothing to do with the operation of Parsonage Cottage. Those are the financial statements. And the financial statements are what should be referenced, and I think what were referenced as far as your review was done. That's what we were told when this started, but we end up discussing tax returns. We're ready to resolve this. I would like to challenge you publicly to tell me what you want. What can we provide you? Detail it to us. We don't want to have any more private conversations or emails. Tell us what you want publicly so we can respond publicly. I would love to do that. I would love to respond publicly to you. we would like to do that. And by the way, if anyone can produce an offer to us from the BET working group in writing, I would love to see it. We'll consider it. We would accept it, I think, with my board's approval any minute. But as far as I'm concerned, I've never seen this in writing. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Peter, I just need more forms.
Chris Von Karsling is next, and then Rich DePretta.
Mr. Von Keisling, you're 3 minutes up, followed by Mr. DePretta. Mr. Von Keisling, followed by Mr. DePretta. Mr. DePretta, here before Mr. Von Keisling.
Good evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Richard DePretta. I am the chair of the Parsonage Cottage Home for the Aged Board, which is also known as the Fundraising Board. A simple process that seemed simple has certainly become complicated. I would like to urge the board to separate the motion. I believe that the BET is overstepping its bounds by qualifying a CDBG grant, which is my understanding is unprecedented, where the CDBG RTM members have already gone out and approved all of the service and the capital improvements, and now the BET, seemingly at the 11th hour, is now putting a condition on it. And the condition seems extremely open-ended. I was listening to Ms. Kiernan's comments before the condition, and she defined it as very simple, but that can be dangerous as well, because I don't know what you're looking for. I'm not sure if the Housing Authority knows what you're looking for. And the problem is, by putting this condition on it is just an easy way for you to ultimately deny this grant. If the condition isn't met, which we don't know what the condition is, you simply say, you didn't provide us with information, you didn't meet the condition, and now the boiler is not approved. Comments that were made are that nobody has a problem with Parsonage Cottage, nobody's looking to deny the funds to Parsonage Cottage for the boiler. It just doesn't sound true to me, because it's very simple. If you wanted to provide the funds for Parsonage Cottage for the boiler, then don't put a condition on it. And then it's done. But putting a condition on it jeopardizes the approval of the boiler. Secondly, I'd like to second Mr. Johnson's comments about, I think we need some public meetings and more public forum on when these questions are asked. I'm not in a position to provide information. That's not what the fundraising board does. However, I'm happy to try to facilitate. I hear from both sides that we're asking information, and I'm hearing from the other side that everything's been provided. I don't really know what the correct answer is. However, it seems that we should get to the point where we reach that everyone's questions are answered. But the last point I would like to make is that the CDBG, or Parsonage Cottage, has come before CDBG several times for capital improvements. It's been approved in the past. This one is up for debate now, but there will be another opportunity in the future. So if this lingers on and there are questions about funds going back and forth, and if there's a capital reserve, there will be an opportunity in the future to ask those questions. Now is not the time to. They are two separate issues. Does Parsonage Cottage need the boiler grant approved, or does the BET need information? You can still get the information and you can still approve it. The next time, whether it's next year, 2 years from now, where another capital improvement request is made, you will have the right, and you have the right whether a request is made or not, to ask for whatever information you're asking, and it will be granted. But conditioning the approval of this boiler it's just not right. It's not fair to Parsonage Cottage. It's not fair to the members that came before you, members of the RTM who put in time and work and approved this. And it's not fair to the residents. I would hate to think what happens this winter if the boiler goes and there are no funds to approve it. I think that's my last comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Mr. Von Keisling, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Von Keisling. I'm the Vice Chair of the Community Development Advisory Committee for the First Selectman,
It may be interesting to note that I'm elected by the whole body of the committee, whereas the chair is appointed by the first selectman. Been on this committee for 15, 20 years. I realize there are greater questions about the relationship between the two sovereign bodies, it seems, of the BET and the Housing Authority. And we've had 2 laborious and not collegial years of hashing over this with no outcome. The CDBG that you have before you, however, is a compilation of specific grants to not-for-profits to provide vital support and direct service to the frail, elderly, and vulnerable citizens of Greenwich, period. It's quite separate and untainted by the discussion that's being held in the working committee. The specific thing we have before us is the Parsons Cottage boiler. I was on that subcommittee that investigated it and vetted that request. It is the only one boiler left that's functioning. I believe it was an original boiler when we took over the place. It is over 20-some odd years or more, maybe more over. It has been band-aided and patched to the point of really diminishing returns. It is at the verge of failure. Could happen any time. It's a ticking time bomb. If it happens this winter, we will have the health department will declare the PC is Parsons Cottage is uninhabitable. The town will have to send its 50-some odd residents to the Hyatt Hotel or wherever and maintain them in the period of time it'll take to put a new boiler in, a few months at best, because that's not an easy thing to do. What will be the cost in finance of the town that you're making yourself liable by this situation, and what will be the cost in emotion and health to those frail and elderly for which you specifically are responsible, as I am, as elected representatives of this town. Now, Ms. Kiernan's statement made a troubling accusation to me. She said that this agreement, this construct for Parsons Cottage that we're now trying to wrap up, right, that nobody really understood what it was at the time. We had Judge Crummick here sitting next to his wife earlier this evening. Judge Crummick was the chair at that time, of the Board of Social... Ms. Kiernan, yes, I would appreciate at least a stone face. Thank you.
30 seconds.
So, and he certainly did not act in ignorance when this was put together, nor did the BET, the town, and all the other bodies that agreed to this. That is a hell of a accusation, in effect, to say that we didn't know what we were doing. The conditions are unspecific and therefore not good business. There's no direct application of these conditions to the Parsons Cottage boiler grant, and therefore it appears that this is an action by the BET or intended action to leverage to achieve a forced compliance by the Housing Authority to the BET's demand on the Housing Authority in their reference to the working group. Excuse me, one moment. Unusual as this, and perhaps unprecedented, it may be, as the town's attorney cited, possible, but it has been honored in its disuse, the conditioning. In the middle of both sides, I stand in the middle of both sides as Mr. DePretta does, instead to you. I don't know who's not telling me the straight story. I've heard both stories. I have access to people on both sides. I have people I trust and respect on both sides, and they tell me a totally conflicting story. Somebody must be wrong. And I think this has gone on much too much, and this has become a silly little catfight in the public. The appearance of this is we can't handle our business because we can't bring it to conclusion. I think that we let a neutral body such as the Community Development Advisory Committee decide the specific conditions are satisfied or not, and let them solve this issue for us and be done with it. I think, gentlemen, this is something I stand behind Ms. Tarkington's point and the gentleman from the far end there. Is it the far right? The gentleman from the far right. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, you have any more?
Anybody else speaking?
Peter Tessie?
First selectman.
Peter's ex officio of the board.
Good evening,
Excuse me,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, there one more person put his hand up back there.
Would you just fill out something with the, go ahead, Peter, help him out. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Good
Peter.
evening, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Erf reminded me that Ms. Rutgers, who chairs the Community Development Advisory Committee, sent a letter, and I'll just wanted to read it into the record.
Thank you.
She writes, "Dear BET members, I apologize that I'm able to attend tonight's meeting. You have before you the First Selectman's final funding recommendation for allocation of the program year 2016 Community Development Block Grant, CDBG. This budget in the amount of $829,369.37 represents much hard work done by members of the Community Development Advisory Committee, CDAC, which I have the privilege to chair. As CDAC chair, I thank all members of our committee for their diligence in putting together a CDBG budget recommendation for the First Selectman. This involved holding public hearings, making site visits to all the applicant agencies, and evaluating the programs and capital requests, giving priority during CDAC deliberations to the needs of the most vulnerable among us. The First Selectman received further public input on the CDAC recommended budget during a public hearing on August 11th, after which he made his final decision on the budget he has now presented to you. Following BET action, the CDB budget goes before the RTM for final approval. The town process for approving the CDB budget is a well-established and time-honored one. I would hope that members of the BET respect this process tonight and approve the CDB budget as presented without introducing an unprecedented condition that fundamentally destabilizes a process that has served us well." And that was from Alma Rutgers, who chairs the advisory committee, who
Thank
cannot
you.
be with us tonight.
Roland, could you just make sure that's attached in the minutes? Thank you. Peter, you ready? Thank you. Spider Morris. Welcome, Mr. Morris. Welcome.
I think Sean invited him. I'm not sure he really wanted to speak.
Well, you have the floor.
How many seconds have I?
Forever.
I think it's a no-brainer. If the boiler conks out, somebody's liable to die, and the BET's going to have some explaining to do. If somebody dies up there, it's... I didn't expect to speak, but that's about all I'll have to say. How many seconds have I got, Pete?
You have plenty of time.
As much as you want.
That's it. I'm not prepared. That's all I want to say.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry? Okay, so in keeping with the original remarks of the meeting, I'm going to hold off votes. So as we see it now, we will have to, when the time comes, if there's no further discussion, we'll have to vote on the motion before us, and that will in turn bring us back to the original motion. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that because the public hearing is still open. Mr. Finger.
So I wasn't planning on making comments to the motion, but given some of the public comments, I think I felt it important to point some things out to members of the board who are not on the working group, so I can address some of the comments that were made during the public hearing. There was a comment made that it's unprecedented to have an outside auditor go in and audit the books. I just want to point out to our board that the housing authority entity that runs Parsonage Cottage agreed in their agreements with the town to allow the town, through the comptroller, to go in and audit the books of Parsonage Cottage. So there was nothing done that was not already agreed to by the housing authority. We had that right, and we exercised it. There was a comment about public meetings. The working group every meeting it's had has been a publicly noticed meeting. The next public meeting of the working group is December 1st at 11 o'clock in the Mazza Room, so there will be an opportunity for anybody to attend that meeting. All of our meetings have been public. There were several comments about if something should happen this winter, there's no money if we don't approve this. Just want to go back to what Princess had spoken to us earlier, that even if this is approved without any conditions, there still is no CDAC money available for this winter. So if the boiler is in such dire need that it might break down this winter, the CDAC request probably should have been made for the last planning year and not for this one. So, So I just want to point out that even if this was approved without a condition, there is no CDAC money available this winter. So I just wanted our board to be aware of those things. Thank you.
Just, Mr. Raymer?
Yeah, I just want to be a little more specific about Mr. Finger's last point. The remarks that Princess Erfe made at the beginning of the meeting before many of the people came in, unfortunately, it would have been better that you've been here to hear her remarks. She said in some years, you're getting the funding as quickly as the equivalent of getting the funds in June of 2016 for an application you're making now. In other years, it takes until November or December of 2016. But in no event are any of those funds available for this winter. And so to repeat what Mr. Finger said before, if we have a condition, then that condition gets satisfied by April. Please, you're out of order and you're rude. Allow me to speak.
Chris.
Nevertheless, you'll endure my speaking. If there is a condition, the condition looks to a resolution no later than April. April being at least 3 months before the earliest date at which any funds could be available to you. Perhaps it's as many as 6 or 7 months before they would have been available to you. If there's no condition, exactly the same result obtains. And so, speaking just for myself, I'm convinced that I don't see the hardship of the condition, and so I will be voting accordingly. But I think it's important that the people who are here because they have heartfelt feeling for Parsonage Cottage, that you realize that nothing that's happening here is threatening your ability to deal appropriately with your residents this winter. It might have an effect upon what's happening next winter, but everybody has the expectation of resolving this certainly no later than the coming April, 6 or 8 months before any relevant period involved. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Johnson?
Can I say something? I'll sign up. Do I have to sign up?
Just announce let us know who you are.
So I'm a resident at Parsonage. And
Good evening.
I don't see what's the big deal. Why are you bringing up two subjects when we're here for one? The loan deal, that was supposed to be settled 2 years ago. You people needed some time to find out what it was all about. Well, if you haven't found out what it's all about by now, it's too late. But as far as this burn is concerned, we need it. It's put together by Band-Aids right now. And if something happens this winter, it's going to be very cold for all of us. I'm 88 years old. I don't want to be putting on 32 blankets to keep me warm. And I think this thing should be passed. You're making a big deal out of really nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. I had Mr. Johnson next.
What I'd like to suggest, it was based on Tony's comments that, so we have the next scheduled public meeting of the BET Parsonage Cottage Working Group is December 1st. What I'd like to suggest is by next Tuesday, the 24th, we first of all release the auditor's review, financial review, so that's out there as to what the results were, so everybody gets to see what that is. And we'll put together a list of all the questions, of all the information that we are still looking for, so that you have a week then to prepare and present to us at our meeting on the 1st.
Is this an audit of the Housing Authority or Parsonage Cottage?
Housing Authority. And
Parsonage Cottage.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's information requested from both entities. And it was not an audit, actually, it was a review of financial information.
But Housing Authority as well.
As well as Parsonage Cottage. So what we'll do is we'll release that information, and I mean, Mary Lee, please indicate what you'd like to do. But we'll release all the different questions, so that'll give you a full week to bring that with you, or send it to us in advance, and then we can hopefully resolve all this on December 1st.
Well, I guess my only question is that, are these new questions, or are these questions that you've been asking previously?
I think it's all stuff we've already asked in the past, but, we'll get it all out.
The date will be on all the material for the requests. It's, as you know, you've seen.
So let's ask Ms. Kiernan if she
Can I just
respond.
clarify, Mark, thank you, that I just want to be clear, the operating agreement put in place in 1995 gave the controller authority to look at the books and records of both the Parsonage Cottage Senior Residence Limited Partnership, okay? and its general partner, the Town Hall Annex Corporation. So those are the two entities, and Amina and Wayne, I see you nodding, correct any of us if we misspeak, but those are the two entities for which we had authority to look at books and records, not the Housing Authority. That is a different entity.
No audits of the Housing Authority or requests for financial information for the Housing Authority itself.
Correct. The other point I want to, if I may, Mr. Chairman, clarify, there was a statement that we have not, we, the BET, put any offers in writing. And I think what I'd like to do is ask Assistant Town Attorney Amina Ahmad to transmit again to the Housing Authority, I think, two different letters in which we have made very specific financial offers. One was dated, I think, November 2013 was the initial offer. And then there was a later one where we, again, reiterated both the refinancing offer, which was extremely generous and would have brought the cash flow down to a place that the Housing Authority suggested would be helpful to them. So we went right to that level and refinanced right there. And then we also made further suggestions, which include that they should comply with the covenants that existed in the original loan agreements that were put in place in 1995. So, Amina, if that would be okay, if you could retransmit those two letters to the Housing Authority so that they see these offers have been in writing for a very long time. And we, I'm sorry, excuse me, if you could transmit those, we would be grateful. And so that will be available to the public as well to see that we made these offers quite a long time ago. Thank you.
Mr. Goldrick, followed by Mr. Finger.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Von Kaiserling and I went out to Parsonage Cottage and took a look at the boilers and had a discussion with the personnel there. I think one of my concerns was that this sort of major piece of equipment, major repairs, should not be dependent on a block grant. And those block grant funds are not only fast declining in absolute terms, but also in real terms. This facility needs to have a much firmer basis, a much firmer funding basis from which to take care of this sort of major repair or replacement. And, Mr. Von Kaiserling was there. I brought up some questions about the financing of that. I'm not privy to all of the discussions that have gone on this working group here, but we were looking for some more transparency. And again, I think that's, we're talking about what happens if this thing goes out. We can't have a situation where you're waiting almost a year for block grant funds that are minuscule right now. That facility needs far more than what can be afforded by the block grant. So I think, from my perspective, I think we need a much firmer foundation financially for this and need to understand exactly what all of the requirements are and what we need to do. And I noted that there were some very substantial payables also from Parsonage Cottage. It's something else that, I don't understand completely, but hopefully when this audit is back on December 1st, a lot of these questions will have been answered. I understand they will be available for me to take a look at it at that point. And I guess my last point is, Mr. Tessie read a statement by Ms. Rutgers. I wondered if he would like to add something of his own feelings on this subject now.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Finger,
Just want to clarify what.
Mr. Finger, Mr. Tessie, and then I have a form from, where's George? Good to see you. I didn't see you there, Peter. I'll call you next.
Good evening.
Mr. Finger, just wanted to clarify one thing real quick.
Mary Lee had asked Wayne and Amina if you get those letters that she was referring to with the counteroffer, I guess you was referred to the Housing Authority, but maybe, Mr. Chairman, it would be appropriate, and Mary Lee, Mark, and Leslie, to also have a copy sent to Mr. DePretta for the Parsonage Friends Group so that they, too, see what was put in writing.
Yeah, I think what we'll end up having to do December 1st is a complete email transcript, and we'll have all that. So
Great. Just to be responsive to Mr. Goldrick, I think you should know by now that the budget you have before you is the budget that was approved by me. So the allocations that are before you that were recommended by the advisory committee come to me. We held a public hearing, as was so noted in Ms. Rutger's comments. We did make one adjustment and allocate funds to the Historical Society to support their efforts to make their campus ADA compliant, along with the much more extensive capital campaign that they'll be embarking on. As far as the condition, I do not support the condition. I would separate the two issues and allow this to go forward unencumbered.
Mr. Yankovic, former chair of the Housing Authority, Town of Greenwich, am I right?
My name is George Yankwich. I'm a commissioner on the Housing Authority. I'm also a member of the fundraising board. I'm also a licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut, and I've been involved with boiler replacements of this type on both Wilbur Peck. We've done it at Armstrong Court and a similar system at Indian Harbor Yacht Club. So I've looked at this boiler. We've been looking at this boiler for several years now to address the questions that you brought up. Early in the CDAC process, we prepared a 5-year capital replacement plan. The boiler was on that list at that time, and one of the assumptions on that plan was the forgiveness of the loan. We would have accumulated $38,000 in 2013, 2014, and 2015, when in that 5-year plan it showed that the boiler would be replaced. During the process with the working group, we did evaluate the refinancing, and to that end, I had prepared a 27-year capital replacement plan that showed how cash flow, contributions from the fundraising board, minimal block grants would perform over that 27-year period, showing the boiler being replaced in 2015, and again, 20 years from now. So we looked at the life cycle of all the products that have to be replaced. And during the last 20 years, very little capital improvements have been done on major structural issues. So we were looking at roof, siding, the boiler. In addition to the boiler is the heating system. It's separate from the boiler system. They've got these units that are stuck in the sheetrock ceiling that are part of the replacement process. So we did look at all those items. We did look at using cash flow in combination with block grants and contributions to cover them. And if you don't have a copy of that, I know we recently resent it over to Peter Menarski. We had done that in the summer of 14 to look at how this 27-year refinance would impact the parsonage cottage. So there is information out there. We have thought about it. And the question that came up is, if the boiler fails this winter, what would we do? I mean, there is a reserve fund that was provided for in the original financing. It's an emergency reserve fund. It's not for capital improvements, but in that case, we would have to tap that, and we would forfeit the block grant. So if we did the work before the block grant came through, we have money in the parsonage cottage reserves that we don't want to touch because contractually we're obligated to maintain those. So we would have to find a way to refurbish those or replace those. So there is information there, Mr. Goldrick. I'd be glad to sit down with you or any member of the board, which I've been offering for 2 years, to explain the capital program out there. Thank you.
Thank you. As we, I think, sort of come to the end, let me just offer a few comments, some notes that I've taken, and I think sort of should be sort of the public. At the Budget Committee meeting last Monday night, I had made a decision that the original CDBG item would be on our December call for the full BET, the original loan forgiveness request. At that time, I had asked the committee, the working committee, to schedule a meeting to finalize all the communications, and the item would be before us, and the BET would fulfill the obligation of this item. Yay, nay, dispose of, whatever it was going to be, because obviously we have a turnover coming in January of a third of our board. But with that said, I think there's a missing item here. I served on CDBG 8 or 10 years ago for this board, and we had double the allocation coming from the state. So as the allocations coming from the state continue to reduce, that puts more pressure on all of these items. The Housing Authority in the Town of Greenwich, I believe, has 3 other items in this year's CDBG. I might be 2 other items that there has been no discussion on. They're going through. They're for different locations you have, maybe. Am I close with 2 or 3 other items? Thank you. one other, whatever it is. So with that said, I heard Judge Crummick, boy, that's a new name to mention, Judge Crummick, but I heard that name come up, and quite frankly, I look around the room, none of us were there when the Housing Authority at the Town of Greenwich entered into an agreement on managing Parsonage Cottage. We weren't there. Tony wasn't there. Chris was there. You were there. We weren't there. And I remember the BET actually asked Judge Crummick to come visit us, and I remember his statement. He goes, it was a very complicated deal at the time. That there was a big push around the state for tax credit financing for these type facilities, and the town did this. And I remember him saying New York City still does this daily, and we hadn't done it that much before. We have just recently done one for Nathaniel Wither. Am I right, Mr. Norton? So we have recently done one of these, but we hadn't done this. This was an out of the norm. So we did go back to try to find some of the people who were there then to sort of help us sort of what I call unravel it. The process for the boiler, I think, George, thank you, wherever you went. I think that is an accurate process of how, if the boiler went, what they would do. The current chairman, Mr. Romeo, and I even had the conversation. It's still a town asset, and the Housing Authority has a relationship with the town. If something happened, that relationship is there, and something, wouldn't be out of the norm for the town to be able to do something with the Housing Authority. It's something we have a relationship with. If there was an emergency, obviously nobody's going to look away from any of that. I mean, we've had Hurricane Sandy where we've had to go out and.
Come out of their emergency
Please.
fund.
Chris, please. So, but yet what I just saw was a great example of sort of the dialogue, and I'll sort of say this with a smile. You're asking for a written document about the loan modification, and it didn't exist. Please send it to me. And then George is here saying, we talked about that loan modification that you offered and the benefits to it, and sort of not being on the committee, but as chair sitting there and watching, this is sort of the continual dialogue. I would say that December 1st, we have a 11 a.m. meeting scheduled. That day will be the final committee meeting. There'll be a presentation to the BET at our regular meeting. It'll be noticed. Our meetings are obviously all public, so there's nothing there. All the material will be included on it. I think anything between now and then, we have about a week and a half. We'd do it earlier, but obviously Thanksgiving's in the middle of this. But I think that's when we come together, and I think, all the people that spoke tonight, Rich, Tony, George, I think it's time to package this and go with it. Again, I think one of the most important considerations, and our town attorney's still here, and we've had this dialogue, whatever we do, forgive, modify, change, forgive, change the interest rate, change the terms of the financial documents, that's only us making a recommendation to the RTM. So our concern is we have to make that recommendation and be able to send that to the RTM, and then it's going to take both of us to.
They can only act on what you send them.
Right, we have to send them an item, and they're thank you, Chris, last time, okay? So with that said, this is where we are. Again, for our board, we have two items on the table. We have the first motion to separate. We have to dispose of that motion first, and then we will vote on the item as amended or not as amended, whatever way it goes. Okay. Is there anyone else for the public hearing? I just want to give everybody, okay. You sure everybody's, okay. So just to keep this clean, okay, I'm going to call it the Ms. Tarkington motion to separate. I'm going to call it that. Let me just write this down. All those in favor, signify by, raise your hands, aye. To separate, 1, 2. All those opposed to separating the motion, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and that's full. So it's 2, 10, 0. So that motion has failed. That brings us to the original CD1 item on the agenda. Okay, for the discussion, certainly we had that.
I think you need to close the public hearing, don't you, before we vote on.
Yeah, I will. I'll just want to keep this clean from a minute's point of view. Okay. Okay, item CD1 as presented. All those in favor of that item? signify by saying aye with your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 12-0, that item is carried. Okay, thank you, everyone. Is there anyone else for any of the CDBG items? Comment, public, anything? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing at this point.
Move that we close the public second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That moves us to the assessor's report for this evening. Just give them a second.
Yeah, I will.
One second, Lauren.
It's fine by me. That's quite all right. No hurry.
All right, everybody, I just wanted to give everybody a second to move out. Sorry for that. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for November 2015. Included also are the budget, the operational plan, and my capital budget requests as well. First things first, update on the 2015 revaluation. Notices are being sent out. They started out last week. Everybody should have them in their mailboxes, hopefully by Wednesday or Thursday at the latest. As I have mentioned in the past, the revaluation company shall be opening to hearings. We'll have 8 weeks of hearings. And in addition, we'll also, please, if anybody has any questions or concerns, they also may contact the assessor's office as well. I'll be available for questions. Sure, certainly.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
As an owner of a commercial property in town, I received the the
sorry.
assessment. But if I will, I'm a little confused. In that, you talk about if you're a residential owner, you're allowed to go to the BAA. If you're a commercial owner, it says, quote, the board may elect not to conduct a hearing prior to rendering a decision on the appeal. Why the difference with a commercial property?
There is, in the Connecticut state statutes, there is a statute that says the Board of Assessment Appeals may elect not to hear it if your assessment is over $1 million. They can opt out of that. It's my understanding that the Board of Assessment Appeals, for the most part, does hear commercial. But if they want to this time around, they have the ability in which not to hear it if they don't want to. It's in the Connecticut state statute.
So it's a state thing.
State. Yes.
And then just one other question, and you were nice to include examples for all of us in the packet, but in the front page, it does show the estimated taxes based on the assessed value, but then it gives a footnote saying that your actual taxes obviously will,
Right.
some of us may know something about setting taxes, but is that misleading a little bit to the?
Well, basically what we're trying to do here is to take your assessment and compare it as though we had implemented the assessments last year. In other words, apples to apples here. Yeah, current mill rate. So no matter what you do with the budget, whether you increase it or what have you, this is where you would have stand in relation to it. So we're trying to take the budget out of play here. Okay?
And may I just add that is exactly what we've done 5 years ago and 10 years ago.
Same
so
letter.
that similar notice to what we've done in the past.
Yes.
Lauren, will the revised or the new 2015 revals be online for people? So if they want to do comparative analysis?
It will be to a degree. We don't have a lot of information out there available to the public, but it is available in my office, and we will have loads of lists and what have you for people to be able to come in and compare. And as I have mentioned before, we'll have extended office hours as well on Tuesdays and Thursday night.
Mr. Norton was next. Mr. Goldrick, you're next.
Yes, Lauren, I did receive today, or
Okay.
I was told I received it today. And living in a condominium, it's more than a 10% increase. Is that going to be pretty standard for condominiums?
For condominiums? It depends. You like that answer? I'm sorry. It depends on what has happened in the market. I mean, basically, that's what we're trying to, and some condominiums have gone up, and some condominiums have kind of, it basically it depends on what the value of it was. The assumption is that we may or may not have been truly accurate on your last assessment. So we're trying to get everybody equitable and on the same page here.
In this particular case, in relation to prices, it was accurate.
Okay.
It's more than a 15% increase.
Unfortunately, if that's what the market is showing, that's where your assessment will land.
Nice way of saying aren't just yours is going up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
I would like to pursue my usual in regard to the outstanding issues of the Superior Court. And I see you continue with the improvement, but could you talk about the 2010 grand list in which there are 8 items which seem to have been there, and now we're going back?
Yes, they've been, yes. And we keep on addressing and bringing forth in pre-trials, and things keep on getting continued, and they should be resolved soon. And unfortunately, it's not necessarily the town of Greenwich, it's continuing by the other parties as well.
They're both commercial industrial. Is it?
Yes.
Is it one or the other?
They're commercial properties.
They're both commercial properties. And my recollection in the years I've served on this board, it's been unusual to see items, this number of items, linger this long.
I think to the contrary.
Actually, when I got here, there were still pending 2001 appeals when I.
Right, yeah, but there were very few. But I mean, I'm talking more about the quantity than, there are 8 of them here, and there have been 8 for an extended period of time. Okay, those are my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Goldrick?
Yes, Ms. Elliott, you mentioned the last time the shift from property or land valuations to structure valuations. And you said that it might affect different communities differently. Now that these notices are going out, I mean, it seems to me that if that's the case, that residents, homeowners south of Route 1 might see themselves shouldering a larger portion of the total property tax than people say in backcountry. Can you give us an idea of relatively what those neighborhoods are going to be doing?
Actually, we were finding that our assessments were regressive. It was actually the exact opposite of that. In other words, if we had too much value on the land, there was very little distinction or difference between a 3,000 square foot house and a 1,000 square foot house. And that was what we were finding was a little bit distorted in the sense that we had too much value on the land, so there was very, very little difference between houses that were rather relatively new or just built and much bigger compared to those much smaller homes. So hopefully by doing this, we will have basically more equitable assessments in the sense that the bigger the house, the bigger the sale price.
Just if I could just follow on that, because south of Route 1, you've got, what most communities would be considered postage stamp properties.
Right. But the decrease in land values was across the board, not only in the backcountry, but around in town as well. We just had, in my opinion, we just had too much value on the land and not enough on the dwellings and the actual structures. And even though in the backcountry, you're seeing a devaluation or the market not increasing as well as other areas closer to town, that's going to be reflected in the sales back there. But you'll also see that their improvement values have increased as well. So the decrease in residential in the actual structure or in the land value is it's compensated by the increase in the overall valuation of each structure.
Mr. Blankley, followed by Mr. Finger.
So a question suddenly occurs to me, Lauren. If the balance between land and improvement is going to swing towards improvement, what sort of impact is that going to have for insurance? We don't insure land, but we do insure property.
For the town.
Is there, for any individual who... is there an implication there or not?
No, because something tells me when you get your insurance, it's going to be replacement cost new, is it not? When you get your homeowner's policy, it's to replace your dwelling, it's to build it new. That should far exceed what we have on our values. So I don't believe the insurance company actually ever uses the assessor's records for actual valuation of their dwellings.
Mr. Finger.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to take an item out of order from the agenda. Item under new business, we have the approval of the assessor's budget, 2016-17 budget and operational plan. I'd like to move that we take up that item now while the assessor is still with us.
I'd
So
second
it doesn't
that.
stand.
Wow, a lot of seconds there.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so one thing I would ask real quick, is there anything else on the assessor's report? I would just like to get a vote.
And we should ask Lauren if she finished her assessor's
Yes.
report, because I
Yeah.
interrupted her.
Yeah, that's quite all right. No, if anybody has any other questions?
Okay, Mr. Rimmer?
I recognize that the values are based on neighborhood by neighborhood, but in the overall, what has the grand list gone up by? And on residential, what sort of overall percentage for land, what sort of overall percentage for improvements? Again, recognizing that for individual properties, it depends on their neighbor, but I wonder if you had figures for that.
Yes.
If you don't, I can get it another time.
No, it's fine. I'm projecting, now, I do understand that these are preliminary hearing, values, and they are subject to change, both up and down. That being said, I would imagine that the overall grand list is probably going to go up roughly 5% overall. 5%. Now, as far as residential land is concerned, we saw a reduction of about 17% in land, but we saw an increase of 34% in structures. For
residential, or that's residential and commercial both?
No, that's just residential. So an overall increase in the residential properties of roughly 5%.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. All those in favor of the assessor's report?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, that brings us to the item off of new business. I'll call on Mr. Finger or Ms. Tarkington, your choice. Normally, there are two liaisons there, so if you have any reports or comments?
Well, just, a quick summary is that Bill and I have been meeting regularly with the assessor, actually weekly over the last several months as the reval has been going on. And more recently, Lauren and Bob presented their operating budget to us, and we reviewed it and made comments, and their budget has come in where they proposed 2% on the operating side. They've also presented a capital budget, because, and this has been in our plan and in the budget book for the last 3 years since Lauren has joined Town Hall. And it shows that as soon as we complete this reval and approve the mill rate next May, Lauren and her staff and her department will be starting the physical reviews for the reval of 2020. So the capital budget reflects that ongoing process. And this is structured as was discussed with Peter Bernarski and Roland 3 years ago. And so the numbers are consistent. They reflect no increases for inflation or anything. If you look 3 years ago, you'll see exactly the same numbers for the upcoming year in the capital budget of 2016 and 17. And Lauren also has put forth her operational plan. Again, Bill and I have reviewed it, commented on it, and includes what few comments we had. And it includes the organizational chart for the department. So, Bill, do you have some additional comments?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that as part of the preparation for the reval of 2020, Lauren has structured her department and is planning on doing more of the analysis and the field checks internally, so there will be probably a reduction in the expenditures for outside consultants to do the work. So that's the way Lauren has always presented this to me and Leslie during our meetings since Lauren joined the town, and that's the way she structured her capital budget.
And let me add one more thing. The next reval will be the physical reval. This current reval is statistical. So actually, Lauren presented at a neighborhood association meeting recently, and several people asked Lauren why the assessors from the department hadn't entered their homes to review the reval. But the next one will be physical, and so that's, moving ahead with that process to, again, as Bill pointed out, do more of the process inside and trying to manage the expense that we would have in 2020, otherwise for this type of reval.
Okay, Ms. Whistler?
So I guess I'm on now. I'm looking at your first goal, which is the implementation and full utilization of QDS. And could you elaborate a bit more on what's entailed? And also you mentioned that a risk to the time frame is coordination with the collector's office. Is it that, can you explain sort of what you mean by that?
Well, what we're trying to do is to fully utilize the quality data system. And there's a lot of options that we have on the assessor side as well as on the collector side, one of which is to have electronic filing for personal property returns and various other things. And the more items and the more things, basically the greater amount of items that we can do electronically and get rid of some of the paper. It will make filing easier. It will make collection for the tax collector's office easier as well. So we're trying to utilize all the options and the benefits of quality data, and hopefully over the next couple of years we'll be able to complete that.
Okay, Mr. Raymer?
I wonder if one of the three people who've spoken could assist me. I thought an explanation outside of but it would be better that the explanation take place here. I note that regular salaries are going up by 8.2%. Temporary salaries are going up by 31.6%, although overtime is going down substantially. I wonder if someone could comment on what's happening there.
Basically, I had a position this year that we kept, but we didn't fund. So I have a vacancy in my office, which I would like to fill going forward for the next few years, as we take more of this responsibility in-house. That's why you'll see the increase of 8.2% for salaries. There's a couple of things. Overtime, because of the reval, we obviously thought we needed it this year, and we've been using it because of the revaluation just to review some of the work that we've gotten back. In addition, we have a temporary salaries. That includes my part-time person, and it also includes any part-time help that we do have. And the next phase as soon as we finish the 2015 revaluation, I'm going to start the 2020 in the sense that I'm going to have to start and have everybody walk around each dwelling in the town prior to 2020. Part of that increase in salaries is that we're going to have to manage that in-house. In my office is going to do. So we're basically going to have to notify all the property owners that, guess what, we're coming on your street. There's going to be somebody there. We're going to make appointments if need be. So I wanted that ability to have additional time if need be to start this next phase in 2016.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I apologize.
Yes.
So the full-time position that you're filling, I'm looking at your organizational chart, but I'm not seeing a box that doesn't have a human's name in it.
No, I don't have that there yet. Would you like me to? Now that you mentioned it, it's not there.
But you indicate that in your organizational chart is actually one more position which isn't shown on page 13 in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
That's the case?
Yes.
And you have a part-time person that you're going to move to full-time? Is that what's happening with that?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure, okay. But you're.
I need to fill. I have a vacancy. It was it wasn't the assistant assessor. It was the assessor's assistant that we have not funded for the last couple of years. That position, the reason why it's not on here yet, I'm not quite sure that's exactly the title or the position I'm going to fill yet. I might want to, it depends on what we all determine, I think, is the best case going forward as to what capacity I'm
So
going to
as
fill.
we're looking at the funding and things in January and February, at that point, you'll be
Sure,
able
I'll
to
get
be more
yes,
specific
yes,
with
yes.
us. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
But that is a position that is on our current table of organization
Yes.
for the assessors. So it's not something that has to get approved as a new position,
Might get reclassified.
not even reclassified.
Or, I'm sorry, retitled.
Right.
But also, Lauren, within your 8.2% increase in regular salaries, is that for a full year?
Starting,
That
yes,
position filled for a full year, not
starting,
the
yes,
last 3
but,
months of the year or
right.
something?
That would start next July 2016.
Further, all those in favor of the assessor's budget and operating plan for fiscal 17?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? That item is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That moves us to Comptroller's report. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. A couple of updates in the Comptroller's report. Year-end closing on page 1. The draft report should be ready this week, and the BET Audit Committee delayed their November meeting to November 23rd. And the first order of business next Monday will be review of the legal letter, which is a confidential document, and they will be in executive session so that only the current BET members can attend that part of it. And then we'll do a review of the draft audit, and then we'll have a complete review with the McGladrey, who's changed their name to RSM US LLP, here in December 10th. And then the auditor, the CAFR, the single audits, the management letter will all go to the BET for approval in December. So we're on schedule with the year-ending close, closing the books and the audits. Moving into the financing of the capital projects, second item on the first page, we'll go to market January 14th, 11 o'clock in the morning. We'll do the bond issue. We're scheduled for a $50 million bond issue. It has no sewer in it, so it's planned to be a 5-year amortization. It's going to be all general fund. And then there'll be $16 million of bands at 11:30, competitively bid. And the credit reviews will be the week of January 4th through the 8th. Any questions before I move farther into Mr. Drake?
How many bands roll off? So the 60 million is not all new, of course, right?
In the second paragraph, you could see where the 80 million, last year we had 40 million bonds, 80 million bands. 50 million rolls off, becomes the 50 million bonds in the first paragraph. And the 30 million becomes the second-year bands. And right now, unless something dramatic happens, we're going to have 30 million new money and have the $60 million band
Okay, thank you.
issued. Ms. Kiernan?
Pete, can you just remind me, are we going to get ratings from all 3 of the agencies or just 2 this year?
That is a question that's going to be addressed next Monday. I had a discussion with the audit chair, and I have some input from some members of the BET that want to drop off one, preferably be Fitch, and some members that want to go for the 3. It'll be on the agenda for the audit committee, and then a recommendation will go to the full BET. That's where it stands right now. Nothing definite. Moving in further down into the retirement section. Over the weekend, I got a letter of resignation. Larry Simon is coming off the retirement board. His last meeting will be December 17th, and he effectively will be off the board per his resignation letter December 22nd. The process is the first selectman, the chairman of the BET, and the moderator of the RTM interview and select the replacement. There's 5 members. I'm on per charter. There's 2 appointed. Mr. Chadwick was the other one with current member, Mr. Simon, then Captain Cordick, and I think it's Lieutenant Coiner, I don't know if he got promoted or not, are elected by the members of the plan. One more item, Greg Stump, the actuary, has given us a temporary actuary report, which the retirement board will be voting on tomorrow morning. Per charter, we're supposed to have a vote of the retirement board that goes to the BET. You'll get that for a December vote, if you wish. The OPEB report, which is not covered under the charter, is not ready yet, but it could be ready by December. I leave it up to the BET. You have new members, 4 new members coming on. What I would prefer and recommend is that like we did last year in this room here, the actuary comes in February, gives a full presentation to the BET Budget Committee, and then you could vote, the Budget Committee can vote on the retirement contribution, which by charter has to be 100% that comes out of the report using the current assumptions. And then the OPEB, which we passed the OPEB funding policy, which also is 100%. So as of right now, he can make a presentation in January or February. But for tomorrow morning, the retirement actuary report is going to be voted on. The town contribution for the current year was $21,610,634. Under 2 scenarios tomorrow morning, we're in the process of doing an experience study. Every 5 years, we have to do an experience study. Did the predicted number of people die? Did we predict it, more or less? Did the number of people retire, more or less? We take them factors and we put it into the actuary report. If we decide to use the assumptions, any experience study, tentatively, the ARC becomes 20.7 million. Roland's model right now is 20.8. If we decide to accept the experience study and implement the changes for July 1st of 2016, the ARC drops dramatically. It goes down to 19,549,000, which is over $2 million lower than this year. So we have to collectively make a decision on whether to accept the current assumptions or the new assumptions for the experience study, which is not ready yet. Any questions? I know I threw a lot out there on that one.
While you're on that, I would think that certainly no later than January for the actuary, for us, for the assumptions, but I would think for the First Selectmen's consolidated budget, and I would think for our thought process that typically begins right after the holidays, we're going, that's a big item. So I would say January, our meeting is the 11th.
Organizational.
That's organizational.
I think in fairness to the First Selectman and the town administrator, they should know what the retirement board is. We're going to know tomorrow morning.
Right.
So that through Roland, they put that number into the budget.
Correct. But we still have to.
As far as
approve
the actuary
assumptions.
reports, they're going to be finalized in December. We could issue them to the new BET in January for a first read, and then Greg Stump can come in February like he did last year, and he could do a presentation in the back room here, and then he could field a whole bunch of questions as far as the what ifs, sensitivity analysis. What if it was 8% assumption rate? What if it's 6.5, et cetera?
Right. Okay, we'll get to that.
Mr. Goldberg, did I hear that correctly, that based on the preliminary experience study, we would have a lower ARC relative to what we...
No. But if it would be 20.7, it would be lower in both scenarios. But last year, it was 21.6, the current year. If we accept the findings of the experience study, it becomes 20.7. If we do not accept the experience study and defer it to July 1st of 16, under the current assumptions that are based on data over the last 5 years, the ARC becomes 19.549.
So the delta in that is that more people, more former employees are living longer, so the experience says we are having a greater payout than what we had, the assumptions we made before. Is that correct?
I'd have to see the statistics. The first part is probably correct. There also might be using a new mortality table. So there's 3 or 4 or 5 factors that go into there. They might have not projected the number of retirements correctly, plus or minus. Same thing with the mortality rate, plus or minus. All of the factors have to go into it. But to answer your question, it's higher than the numbers without the study. The ARC.
Get to it right away.
Got another question.
Anything else?
I was going to mention here the Parsonage Cottage, December 1st, 11 o'clock in the Mosner Room, but that's already been mentioned a few times. And on the bottom of page 6, the lower right, the 4s are actually a dollar sign. It's not 42 million, it's $2 million. Because the OPEB does not have $42 million. I'll open up to general questions on the controls.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you had initiated some discussions with an RTM Finance Committee Special Projects team, is that correct? Based upon your comments on, I believe it's on page 5?
Yes.
Page 8, actually, page 8. My question I'm going to address is, what is the concern with Basel III?
Kathleen, the banks are limited in some of the balances they can take in, and she's limited as far as giving the money she's spreading, has to spread it out. I don't know what their concern is. We haven't, to go back to the beginning for the benefit of all the members, been approached by 3 members of the RTM, the same 3 members that approached me a year ago, interviewed on how the bonding program works. There are 2 projects. They've approached Treasurer Kathleen Murphy, and they want to look at cash forecasting, Basel III, as you mentioned, and the impact on putting money into separate banks, and 2 or 3 other, the CD program. And fortunately, we had most of that information ready, and because we went through the Investment Advisory Committee, we just forwarded some of the information on the CD program, which Kathleen is still working on as far as getting it through the law department as far as the contract. The same 3 individuals are looking at the bonding program. They wanted to see I sent them the debt policy, I sent them the OS from the January 15 borrowing. The most recent CAFR, which is, and I can give them in another week or two, the 15, but the most recent CAFR is June 30th, 14. My guess is that they're going to make a recommendation, and I don't know if these 3 fellows are Democrats or Republicans, relative to the town's current bonding program as far as 5-year bonding versus 20-year bonding. My first meeting with them after sending a lot of information to them is tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock.
Right. No, I could see that in the second paragraph. Actually,
I don't know what their concerns are as far as the
But all those
funding the
documents that
banks.
they're asking for are online. They're,
well, Basel III is
It's-
not, I don't
Basel III is
understand what
not, no.
Basel III applies to. That's my-
Right.
I can give you an update probably tomorrow afternoon. I'll
Okay,
ask
that's
them
fine.
that question.
Okay, anything else? All those in favor of the controls report?
What's that first?
A motion to accept the... All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll be back to you I think, very shortly on the operating plan and the budget, so.
You have the treasurer's report now.
Oh, yes. That brings us to,
Move to accept the treasurer's report?
I have a motion to accept the treasurer's report, seconded by Mr. Finger. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? That motion is carried.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to consider the finance department?
No, we'll get to that. We're going to be there in a second or two anyway, I hope. Anyway, that brings us to item 7, standing committee report. Policy and Procedures Committee has met. Mr. Norton, Mr. Finger.
Actually, I have, Mr. Chairman, for 4 members of the other side, I have This report for Mr. Finger, Mr. Raymer, Mr. Huffman, and Mr. Blankley.
So before we get going, I had asked the Policy and Procedure Committee to sort of take a look at our handbook, simply because we had made a charter change that the RTM had finally approved, and that needed to be consistent. There were a few things that we typically do monthly out of order, so I wanted that to be sort of cleaned up. And there's a few volunteer committees that, or not volunteer, a few of our special committees that no longer exist, so I thought that language needed to be cleared up. As far as procedure on this, the manual comes up at our organizational meeting in January. But we have one other item tonight under new business, the OPEB investment policy statement. If we approve that tonight, that would be another document that would go into that. So what I'm trying to do is try to keep everybody here up to date on the information, so when we get to our December meeting, hopefully we have all these changes that we've made, so we can have a clean policy handbook for the next BET to, shall we say, approve. So with that, Mr. Norton, Mr. Finger, whoever.
Well, the presentation I will make, Mr. Chairman, is that we agreed on to make 4 editorial changes, which are referenced here. Organization and powers on page 18 and 19, and on page 22. On page, it says page 2 of the policy and procedures, which is actually, I guess, page 34. And then in the appendix on page 19, the change from the 60 to 75% on the allocation, which is something that the RTM has already approved. And these are editorial changes.
Mr. Finger?
And as part of this, the new debt policy, or the debt policy and fund balance that was approved September, whenever it was that we approved it, that'll be part of the new manual. And there's another item on our agenda, the OPEB investment policy. If we approve that, that too will be part of the new manual.
Okay, I see organizational meeting is supposed to be the first Monday. You changed it to the second.
January 11th is the second Monday. I don't want to make you out of compliance.
Well, you know, I mean, that's, a snowstorm could change that. Anything could change that, but that's okay.
But it gives us more flexibility, Mr. Chairman, as opposed to a meeting, which could be on the 3rd of January.
Right, if, under the current, it would, yeah, we would have to meet that first Monday, so. Okay, so with that.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick question or comment.
Yes.
You know, Ms. Weisler and I have served as liaisons to this benefits strategy group, which you all might want to consider as something to list here going forward. I believe that committee is going to be continuing, and it's really critical that we have liaisons continuing in that capacity. Up to you to consider whether you want to list that here. And the other point I guess I'd like to raise is I went looking for the minutes of our organizational meeting from 2 years ago, and we had not approved the policies and procedures at that meeting. We actually approved it at the full January BET meeting, and I don't know why that would be. So we're talking about approving this like the 3rd week of January, you're saying, at our first regular monthly meeting?
Yes, yes, yes.
Not the organizational meeting?
Not the, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
But it's handed out at the organizational
Thank you.
meeting. That's what
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, had Mr. Norton and I been aware of this, the benefit strategy group, or realized it, we probably, not probably, I'm sure we would have added that. So I would say it's probably a good thing, Pete, to have Elaine add under the special project teams another bullet, benefit strategy group, since that will be continued.
If I can get from either of you a role with the official name.
Sure.
Whatever, yeah.
We'll give it to you.
That should be covered under one of the pages in the current, I don't know which section. I think it's the second section.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Goldrick?
Yes, if I'm correct, I think there were 3 proposals that Mr. Finger brought up that were voted 1-to-1, and I think they were the 3 proposals that were brought up 2 years ago. Maybe Mr. Finger can discuss that with us.
Be happy to do that. When Mr. Norton and I met Mr. Norton and I met, in addition to the items that are included in the handout. I brought up the 3 items that were part of a discussion in January of 2013. One dealing with
2014.
January 2014. One item was having a procedure that an item can be added to the agenda. Right now, the agenda is controlled by the chair.
Committee assignments.
Another was, and that was discussed and voted on. It was 7-6 2 years ago. Another item was to have each caucus appoint their members or establish the membership on the various committees within the caucus, as opposed to having the chairman make that decision in consultation with the caucus leader for the minority party. That was again brought up 2 years ago. And the third one dealt, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing because it's quite lengthy. Third one dealt with the methodology by which a budget appropriation is approved, coming out of the budget committee, whether it's 7 votes, whether it's 6 votes, whether it's a majority. We had that discussion 2 years ago. That was brought up again, and Mr. Goldrick correctly points out that Mr. Norton and I split 1-1 on that. So that's not included in the documents that you have here.
Correct.
I suspect that will most likely,
what I
can't
would
speak for
say
the
is,
next caucus.
again,
next
I
meeting,
think-
but brought up again, I assume.
Thank you. I think my original intent is to get the policy cleaned up for the things that we have done, and I think those items would be certainly acceptable items in January. There's, so that's our normal procedure. Ms. Weissler?
Just to give you the name of that task force, it's the Healthcare Task Force.
Mr. Goldrick, did you have something else?
So these rules, as they are today, will govern the organizational meeting in January. There will not be, the changes in these rules will not come up until after that organizational meeting.
No, I think, as Ms. Kiernan just said, the idea is to clean up the policy for the changes at the charter and everything, get that will be handed out to the organizational meeting. At our full BET meeting, which is the third week in January, the BET votes on the policy manual then, and in that time frame, there'll be a policy and procedure committee that will review it with the changes updated, the new committee, et cetera, and they can make recommendations, and then any member at our January meeting can make a motion to make change for the policy. I'm trying to work on the manual for what we've done, get us accurate. The items that didn't pass can be brought up again, but we didn't pass them, so they're not part of this current term's handbook.
So in the organizational meeting, when committee assignments are made, you will still be operating under the old rules in which you can arbitrarily put people on committees or keep them off committees.
Correct.
So it'll be there for another 2 years?
Correct.
So
Are you
you-
making a motion to bring up that discussion tonight?
Are you going to vote on this tonight? Or?
No. As I said, this is for everybody's, for some of you, this issue, you've just got it tonight, so that's why I'm putting it so we can get the other item we have on the agenda and anything else that comes up for next meeting, so we can get the manual up to date for the current activities.
Well, getting the manual up to date, I hope for the new people who come in, will be a fight to get rid of that power to punish and intimidate that you retain by the ability to put people on committees for the minority caucus. I hope they have the guts to do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, take exception to the language.
Of course.
using Intimidation.
Sometimes you just look at the source. Okay, so
I take
moving on.
exception to that remark, Mr. Chairman.
What goes
You
around
took those
comes around,
actions.
Mr. Goldberg.
We saw what happened when these powers were put in your hands. We saw what you did. So that's the truth.
We saw it, and we made those decisions according to our handbook and our rules.
Which were voted on and kept in by your majority, not the majority.
They're not my majority, Sean. They're the electorate's authority. The majority of the people, the 67% of the people in the town that voted for the
It's
rules of
unconscionable.
Well, that's your opinion, and we've
bet it
crossed this bridge, and, the broken record is over. I encourage you to work with your fellow caucus members and new members that are coming on board to try to sustain, push for that change. I don't see it right now. Number 8, Nathaniel Witherell Board, Mr. Norton.
Yeah, I had this added to the agenda because the Nathaniel Witherell Board is in the process of retaining a consulting group at the Mailman School for Public Health at Columbia University, which is part of the graduate program there, to complete in the spring semester a strategic review of the operations and potential operations at Nathaniel Witherell. This study will be done, as I say, by a group of graduate students who are working on both master's and doctorate degrees in public health. It will be at no cost to the town of Greenwich. And it's an attempt by the Witherell Board to seek to identify in the continuing care world, changing health care, especially dealing with elderly, with the expansion of assisted living facilities, Nathaniel Witherell's place in that world.
Okay.
And hopefully we'll have that completed. We'll both have the contract to have that completed, I thought by this evening. That's why I asked to put it on the agenda. And then the project will be completed by May of next year.
Okay. MISA Building Committee, I think Leslie, you had two, Ms. Tarkington, you had 2 reports in the...
I have both the building committee, obviously work is being initiated on Phase 2 and Phase 3, which is primarily abatement of asbestos and some PCBs and paint, et cetera. The drainage line is being put out front in terms of storm drainage for the new facilities, and demolition will begin once the rest of the abatement is complete. And then I also had a second report on our GHS fields. The summer work is complete. Amy had, Commissioner of Public Works had planned to bring in some soil and topsoil and plant grass, but the seed that was there took root, and that isn't needed, and I guess she'll get a credit from Clean Harbors for that small portion of the remaining contract. And then some landscaping that was going to be done this fall will be moved to next spring. So I think one of the things she did mention was that the state has requested that trees be removed from the dam area. So while we have some forces that want us to plant additional trees at GHS, the state DEEP has been concerned about too many trees near the dam.
Okay, moving on. Item number, we already closed the public hearing. Approval of the Finance 2016-17 Budget and Operational Plan. Ms. Kiernan and I met with Controller Minarski. Ms. Kiernan, do you want to?
I would just say that we had a thorough review of the operational plan and the budget with the controller, and we're certainly pleased with the department coming in at 1.5% increase. I think we took a little closer look at temporary salaries and professional and other services, and we were satisfied with the good work that our controller had done.
I agree. Any questions, comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? That is carried. Thank you, Peter, very much. That brings us to the next item, review and approval of the proposed investment by the Retirement Board in Monroe Capital. I'll call on Mr. Drake for the Investment Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Investment Advisory Committee recommends the approval of the Retirement Board's investment in Monroe Capital Private Credit Fund of $15 million. This fund will make senior secured loans to mid-sized businesses in North America, and this investment strategy provides a useful diversification within the debt category away from the public debt markets. In addition, since these loans are essentially all floating rate, the investor, that is the town, is protected from the typical risk of debt instruments when interest rates rise, which they're anticipated to do. An investment checklist and investment documents were provided by email to all members of the board on November 10th, and our the Investment Advisory Committee considered and approved this investment unanimously by a vote of 3-0 on a day we didn't have Mr. Blankley, unfortunately, on November 5th. And the Retirement Board approved this by unanimous vote on October 29th.
Thank you. Mr. Raymer, did Law Committee report?
Yep, and the Law Committee reviewed this investment and found it to be, with the assistance of Assistant Town Attorney Gene McLaughlin, we found this to be in legal order.
And that was 2-0.
2-0, yeah.
Okay, discussion on the item? Ms. Weissler had her hand up?
I just wanted to say I found the investment checklist to be very helpful. I mean, from my perspective, you know, it was sort of an easy way, and it sort of answered a lot of questions that I would have otherwise either raised ahead with our colleagues on the Investment Advisory Committee.
Further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? 1. Abstaining? I'm going to, Mr. Goldrick, I'm going to call that 11-1-0.
Just, you usually, we didn't put the dollar amount in there. Usually it's for $15 million.
Yes, that was
So I'd like
reported.
to have the minutes reflect
Yes.
the amount. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chadwick. I saw you sneak in before. Hello, how are you? Let's see. I got given that directive from the controller last month, and we're working our way. Okay, next item. Approval to increase the maximum investment for the Loomis Sales Senior Loan Fund. Mr. Drake?
The Investment Advisory Committee also recommends that the BET approve the increased amounts in the Loomis Sales Senior Loan Fund and the Loomis Sales Strategic Alpha Fund to a maximum amount of $40 million each. These two investments were previously reviewed and recommended by the Retirement Board and the Investment Advisory Committee and the Law Committee. And these are two funds which are currently owned by the town. So this recommendation is just to increase to an upper maximum limit, a limit that isn't anticipated to be reached, but does allow the board the flexibility to manage their fund as they see fit and not return to us and through the whole process with every small addition. So the Retirement Board is going to decide upon the amounts at a future meeting, but the amounts of each fund is not going to be anywhere near the 40 million. It's just an upper limit of flexibility. We approved this unanimously in our committee.
3-0, 4-0?
4-0, I think. It was back in September, so I'm pretty sure it was 4-0.
That's the nimble part. Mr. Raymer?
And the Law Committee looked at these two funds. Let me separate them if I can for a moment. The Loomis Sales Senior Loan Fund, since our last meeting, we have gotten a clarification from the Investment Advisory Committee that their vote, which the minutes originally reflected that they had approved investment in these two funds for the, quote, fixed amount of $40 million, close quote. We've gotten a correction from the Investment Advisory Committee that was actually $40 million each. Secondly, in the intervening time since our last meeting, we have now seen a letter of recommendation from NEPC, our pension advisor, making a recommendation. And lastly, we have received and seen and heard from our assistant town attorney that the simplistic contract documents necessary to make the increases have been reviewed to be in final and found to be in legal order. And so accordingly, by a 2-0 vote, the Law Committee has approved the Loomis Sales Senior Loan Fund as being in legal order. A slightly different circumstance involved, but not necessarily a different outcome, with Loomis Sales Strategic Alpha Fund. As to this fund, you may recall that in addition to the other issues that I just listed out for the Senior Loan Fund, there was one additional issue, and that was that it had been put to us by the Retirement Board that this was intended to be a part of the 25% of the investment portfolio which is restricted to fixed income debt instruments or cash. And we were dealing with an opinion from the town attorney that this investment did not comply with that stricture. We haven't fully resolved that issue. Allow me, if I may, to direct your attention to the flash report, which each of you has in front of you. I'd like to point out to you that in the fixed income grouping on page 1, Loomis Sales Strategic Alpha Fund, at a little bit less than $10 million, is already being classified in that restricted 25%. But in the same breath, I should also point out to you that a little lower down on the page, we have cash within the retirement fund at more than $42 million. So if one were to pull the not quite $10 million out of the 25%, there is presently sufficient cash to substitute to meet the requirements of the 25%. There's some dialogue back and forth. We hope that with some changes to the statement of investment policy of the retirement board being suggested by the assistant town attorney, that we may be able to get to a point where some of these investments, meaning the Loomis Sales Strategic Alpha and also the GAM fund, which we looked at in September, may be includable in the 25%. But presently the advice from our town council is that they are not. What the law committee has done is stepped back from it and said that as long as there seems to be assets in the portfolio sufficient to meet the 25% without application of these particular funds, it should not be the business of the law committee to be the watchdog on this. It should be the business of the retirement board itself to be meeting its own obligations. And we note with importance that the opinions of the town attorney have been clearly communicated to the retirement board, and our controller sits as one of the 5 members on the retirement board. And with that in mind, we have, as a law committee, also approved the Loomis Sales Strategic Alpha Fund, but we do so without offering opinion as to whether or not it's includable in the 25% or whether it should be included in today's flash report as part of that 25%. We leave that to be organized between the retirement board and the town attorney with the assistance from the controller who serves. That's our report.
Further discussion? Any questions?
The assistant town attorney is present, by the way, if anybody has any questions based upon his opinion about what I've been discussing.
You can thank him for that.
Just to make it clear for everyone, maybe it'd be best if we split this vote into Loomis Sales Senior Loan on the one hand and Loomis Sales Strategic Alpha on the other, because people may think about them differently following Mr. Raymer's comments.
Mr. Chairman, there is one further thing that should be mentioned. Exactly the same circumstance applies to GAM, which we approved at our September meeting. We approved it at that time based upon the overt representation here in open hearing from Mr. Chadwick that he was requesting the approval with the intended application for GAM to be to the 75% that is not restricted. I mention that because at least one member of the law committee, I think correctly, is of the opinion that if at a later time the retirement board wishes to classify GAM as part of the restricted 25%, since the vote here at the BET was on the representation that it would not be so included, that it would probably be appropriate for the retirement board to come back and get a BET vote approving that reclassification as if and when such a thing happened. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Drake suggested a motion. I'll take it as a motion. Did I hear a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Motion's moved to split the 2 items. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor on splitting the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried. So I'm going to call it the first vote is on the Loomis Senior Loan Fund. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. Okay, so
11-1.
11-1-0. Okay, on the Strategic Alpha Fund, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Say nay. 2 nays, sorry.
Okay. 3 nays?
3 nays.
Abstaining. 1. So I'm going to put that as 8-3-1. Is that what you have?
Yes.
8-3-1. Abstaining is Ms. Weisler.
And so the votes against were Leslie?
Raymer, Tarkington, and
Thank you.
And Goldrick.
Mr. Goldrick. Okay, moving on. Old business. I have.
We have one last item from Investment Advisory.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
That's
looking
okay.
right at it. I will call on Mr. Drake.
The Investment Advisory Committee also recommends to the BET the approval of the revisions to the investment policy statement of the OPEB Trust under the declaration document which created the OPEB Trust in 2008. This investment policy statement is adopted by and amended by the BET upon recommendation of the OPEB Board. The OPEB Board unanimously adopted several changes to the investment policy statement on November 5th, and you have them in your package in a red line document. The rate of return assumption is updated to 7%, which was 7%, which was a matter that was previously approved by the BET many months ago. And the other changes are essentially modifications of the upper and lower bounds of some of the asset allocation percentages. In general, the ranges are broadened, which allows for more flexibility of the OPEB board in choosing investments in this unusual circumstance we have today when interest rates are really low, and therefore bonds are not attractive in large measure. So the Investment Advisory Committee unanimously voted to approve these changes.
Okay. Mr. Raymer, this is a policy, you didn't take the, okay, discussion of the item? Item's been moved on, Mr. Goldrick?
Yeah, on the asset classes here, do I have this right that you've got some things crossed out? Equities can be between 20 and 80%, fixed income 20 to 80%, cash up to 60%. Am I getting these right? Developed countries, right, up to 50% international equities. This is not what a small fund should be doing. This should be mostly in equities with a small or reasonable fixed income component, and a three-person board that meets every 3 months should not be looking to dramatically change the weightings like this. It's just not responsible. This is a small fund which probably should be outsourced simply, but to suggest that we could go equities down to 20% just doesn't make sense. I would remind the people here that I think the lowest we've been was 50% when everyone was wringing their hands. It was like September of 2011, I think, and there was talk about the fiscal cliff, and I warned about being out of equities because, pointed out, the markets had done poorly for years, and guess what? The market went through the roof, and we lost out on significant upside performance. So the notion that 3 people meeting every 3 months are going to play around with the weightings this dramatically, this is just not what we should be doing. It should be 75% floor in equities, the rest in fixed income. Why in the world we would be considering 60% in cash? It doesn't make any sense. So I would suggest that we send this back to the drawing board.
Further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the item?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 11-1-0. Okay. Old business, nothing on the agenda for old business. BET minutes for October 19th. Get a motion?
If I may, there's a change to the minutes, which I guess in the assessors section, perhaps a paragraph was missed or got missed in the emails. Ms. Tarkenton helpfully brought it to our attention, and would you like to say a word about it? It's really just a correction of an omission.
Right, and this proposed change in the paragraph was actually, Mr. Finger and I asked Ms. Elliott to review it. So she had actually presented the paragraph, which I had sent within the corrected minutes and circulated to the full BET on the 9th, which is the same day. I think it followed Mary Lee's comments on that same day. So it just it missed, and everyone's had the opportunity to review them. Mr. Finger and I think we both feel it needs to be changed.
And as clerk, I'm in favor of it.
Okay. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes as
So moved.
motioned?
Second.
As amended, yep.
And I would ask that you would just circulate the final printed copy, and if a member had a question next month, I would bring them back up.
Great.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Mr. Drake, do you have anything?
No, nothing to report.
Mr. Norton?
No, no,
Under Chairman's report, I had Ms. Kieran and I were invited to the Northwest, Northeast, and Round Hill, if I get it wrong, Association Neighborhood Meeting. And we were escorted that night by Lauren Elliott. That's the right word. She made a presentation on the reassessment and then some of the property values. It was a well-attended evening. I would say some of our other members were there, certainly well over 100 in attendance. There's no doubt about that. It was a very good evening, very good questions, very good dialogue. Again, I would, something this board, we should look for these neighborhood meetings and find people to attend those. But I thought that was very, very, very good. Other than that, we're, as I said earlier, next month is our final month in this term. I've met with Peter and Roland today to see if there's anything besides the Parsonage Cottage Working Group, if there's any other items that we need to close out before the end of the year and get ourselves ready. And other than that, happy Thanksgiving. We're here. Can I get a motion, Mr. Blankley?
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.